Brooke, I am so happy to have you here. I know you are on a very busy whirlwind schedule, touring and talking because everybody wants to talk to you these days because you have so much going on.
Yeah, a big sort of shift, right? And ending the Eater tenure and moving to Portland Monthly. It's interesting. A lot of people are definitely interested and want the Eater details,
Right.
and the vision for Portland Monthly. So yeah, it's been a lot.
Truly, it's 10 years. Wow, that is a long time.
I wish it were 10. It was 6.
Okay.
But I've been writing about food for 10 years.
Yes, you've been writing about
But yeah, I've been at Eater for 6 years, had been. And when I started, it was really, really small. So I started when it was just a part-time site. It was just me and freelancers. And I mean, the site grew a little bit in my time, and in that we, ended up becoming 1.5 person with Janie.
Right.
But when I started, I was like walking dogs between stories, and then eventually got to the point where it felt like it was this machine that felt like we were doing some really cool stuff, and I did some work for Eater's national site, so a lot covered in 6 years.
Well, allow me to toot your horn because I've been following Eater just, from all over every city, and it's like the place to go if you ever want to know what's happening in any town with the food scene. And I feel like Portland Eater is so influential, and you in particular are so influential, the coverage that you have done. And, of course, all of that happened like during the pandemic and everything that Portland was going through. And it was not just a kind of restaurant where to go to eat. It was very much telling the story about the people, the chefs, the makers, kind of the feeling, the heart of the city.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think the food writing that has always appealed to me is food writing that is using food as a lens to talk about sort of a city or a culture or identity or politics or something else, right? Using food as a lens. And I think during the pandemic, we were sort of forced into doing that in a new way, where we were using food as a lens to cover this like global devastating phenomenon.
Right.
And I think that it had been probably since journalism school that I was going to press conferences with the governor. And, that was such a shift. And I think that I'm really proud of that, period at Eater, just because we ended up wearing so many hats during that period of time. Longtime freelancer Alex Frayne was a huge part of that. And we ended up talking about so much more than just restaurants. We were talking about these really difficult decisions that chefs were making,
right?
And we were talking about labor issues, and we were talking about mutual aid, and we were talking about public health, and it was a super challenging period, but I also think like one of the most meaningful things I've done as a food writer.
Right. And I think it really, because for people who don't work in the food industry, a lot of the people, they were home safe, they didn't have to go, they just ordered in. And for people in the food industry, the service industry, it was kind of like magnifying glass into the fact that maybe a lot of them didn't have health care. They kind of had to go to work because they were seen as essential workers because you have to feed the city, right? But at the same time, you're working in kitchens that are very tiny. You can't social distance. They don't have a backup plan. They may not have a backup plan. They don't have savings. And so in these restaurants, we all know, you and I at least know, restaurants operate on tiny margins. No one's getting rich off of opening restaurants.
Right. I would say the exception being like the fast food
chains, they
right?
did great, right?
But the people in Portland, I think like these independent restaurants, you have a lot of chefs that are working the line, alongside their workers. And I think that you are put in such an odd position as a restaurant owner to feel like, how much debt can I really take on?
Right.
And I want to protect my workers, and also I want to stay in business. Right. And I don't know, it ends up being a really, really tricky decision-making process. I think that, there were certain people who really used this period of time to think creatively and do really interesting stuff in that period of upheaval. I just did the story for Eater's national site on queer spaces. And I read this book about queer nightlife, and the sociologist who had written it, he talked about something called a disruptive event, which is sort of a big cultural event that creates such a disruption that people start to reevaluate the structures in which their world exists.
Yes.
And I think of COVID-19 as this huge disruptive event for the restaurant industry, and thinking through, you know, why are we making sure this industry, you know, exists on the exploitation of workers, you know?
Many people left the industry,
Right.
right? We saw a huge exodus of people just kind of at that point kind of giving up and either just doing something else that was just easier.
Yeah.
They still loved it, but they're like, I just need to pay my rent and do, you know, maybe have a chance. Once they finally had a chance to rest and recuperate, they're like, you know, this rat race of working every single holiday is maybe not what I want for my family.
Yeah, and I think especially when they, you know, some people lost family members.
Yes.
Some people got very sick. Some people also just had new relationships with their families, being with them more.
So many relationships ended.
Yeah. Well, my mother's a couples therapist, and
Oh,
so
yeah, she was
career-
booming.
Yeah, 100%. So I think that, you know, there was I think people really reevaluated their priorities.
Right.
And it was interesting to see how people shifted also, like how the kinds of jobs that they sought out. Some people kind of went, you know, fine dining doesn't make sense for me and my family anymore, you know, so I want to do something a little bit more casual, something that's maybe more allows me to pick up my kid from school, something earlier in the day. Or, you know, people wanted to do pop-ups because that worked for them, and it allowed them to sort of pick their own schedules. It was really interesting to see how people, and you know, just in terms of the opposite phenomenon, where yes, people left the industry, but also a lot of people who loved food but lost their jobs or suddenly cooking a lot at home entered the industry. I think that there were some really interesting shifts that happened there.
Yeah, good and bad and all that, but it's talk about a disruptive event for sure. But I thought some really amazing journalism came out during that time, and you're absolutely right about, you know, using food, you could use this lens or whatever, but in which case we talk about society, we talk about what's happening in the city, and I found the Eater coverage to be very much in the pulse of what is happening right now, because you guys were out there getting the stories, what's open, what's not open. And I always felt that there was this kind of to the benefit of for the people, and then really a real love of the industry, because people get, when they think about food reviews or people reviewing foods, and you don't really do a lot of the reviewing, you share the information, right? I mean, is that the difference between Eater and say like another type of publication?
Yeah, you know, it's, gosh, kind of almost a relief to hear you say that, because I think a lot of times people view Eater editors as critics, and we really, really kind of try to, you know, put up a wall there. We're not restaurant critics. There are restaurant critics within the Eater network, Robert primarily in New York. Most of our critics are gone, so, you know, people like Ryan Sutton and Bill Addison, no longer a part of the Eater network, but we, you know, we're pretty much focused on being reporters and editors, and then we provide this service in the form of maps. I think that,
but you do have great taste. I feel like the Eater team always has great taste, and so you know, they're not going to trash a dish or something like that, but they're going to highlight what they like, what they think their readers might like, and so when they do a map, you can trust that the map has been vetted, right? That they've all eaten there and they trust it. So I love that part of it.
I think that is the thing, right? Is that there are places that are not on Eater maps intentionally. And I think that that's something that people will go, oh, well, you missed it. And it's like,
no, we didn't miss it.
You know? I think that, so it's much more about, let's highlight the places that we want to champion, that we think are really, you know, doing something special. My partner kind of laughs at this one Instagram comment I got from someone who was upset, who was like, it's all her handpicked favorites. And it's like, the maps are our favorites, the places we picked out that we liked, that we vetted and thought were our favorites, you know, of course. If you are interested in doing a blog, you can totally do that and pick your favorites.
Absolutely. I mean, I personally have always liked the Eater recommendations, and I know that I see you guys out and about eating, not on the clock, you know, and so I know that the staff itself are what I would call food people who are enthusiastic to eat and eat at lots of different places. And if it warrants coverage or if it makes sense to feature in some way, you guys will. But you're also just going about loving the city and the state and eating lots of delicious food. So.
Yeah, no, there are worse things, right?
Right.
But yeah, I think that there are food stories. I mean, that's the thing that's interesting about Eater, right? Is that we have this huge service machine, right? We have all of these maps, 24-hour guides, cuisine guides, that kind of thing. And then this other sort of section that's all the news, what's opening. And so, you know, we're writing about a lot of different types of restaurants. Restaurants that, you know, we're trying to just keep a pulse on news and take opinion out of it, right? Like what is the real story to be told here? And then we have this like third bucket of stories that are, you know, just are like all sorts of things. Again, those like features, those richer features, those trend pieces, that kind of thing. I think that's a really good cocktail for a site that feels like it has a pulse on a city.
Right.
I'm noticing myself using the present tense at Eater. I have to get myself out of that.
I know, because you have this very exciting new position.
Yeah.
You were the newly appointed editor-in-chief of Portland Monthly, which is, you know, like the magazine in town. And I remember when I heard about your announcement, I thought, oh, they chose the right person, because I truly think that you have a pulse on the city.
That's so sweet of you to say. I think I'm really, really excited about this, just because, I think that I am such a Portlander. There was a period of time I was offered a job before this, and it was in a different city, and I was really excited about the job, and I couldn't leave because I'm just a Portlander. You know what I mean? I really feel like I'm invested in the city, and I want to see it shine, and I want to highlight what's special about it. I think that, you know, Portland Monthly is such a great vehicle for that, because you just have, you know, it allows us to do this with such a broader lens. I love talking about food. I've covered food again for about 10 years. I thought I wanted to be a food writer forever, ever since I was 6, and I'm really excited to actually be able to talk about other things I'm excited about in the city. Our incredible artists, and not that chefs aren't artists, they absolutely are, but, you know, we have great filmmakers, and we have great visual artists and clothing designers, and we have such an incredible outdoor scene. You know, let's explore all of that and use that same sort of idea of using these sort of material things in our city to talk about the city at large and the culture of the city. Right.
And food is just one part of it. I think what makes Portland and Oregon so special is that kind of passion that people have for that kind of thing. And I've always wanted, I think I heard the story before, you kind of shared it when we were at a party, we were chatting about this. It's like, how does Brooke become Brooke? Like, how does this food person, like, how do you cultivate a food person from, like, were you from a small young child? Like, what was your mother feeding you? And what was she cooking for you? Because it seems like either food people come from mothers who don't cook at all or terrible cooks, right? Terrible. And so they have to learn themselves how to cook to feed themselves, or they come from a history of, like, you know, making handmade dumplings and making, you know, everything from scratch. Like, what's your story?
So it's funny you say that, because my mentor, Cheryl Julian at the Boston Globe, she was in the former category. Her mother didn't cook, but I was in the latter. So I grew up in rural Eugene. I grew up within a mile of where Michelle Zauner grew up in Crying in H Mart. So that was a wild book to read, because it was like, wait, where did you go?
I know.
Just to discover we grew up in such similar places.
I love that book. I think I cried the whole way reading that book.
So it's such a special book. I love her. I love that book so much. But my mother collected copies of Bon Appetit. And so I was an only child. My mom had a pretty demanding job. My dad worked outside of the city, and I was bored. So I picked up and I would flip through all of these Bon Appetits when I was really young. And they were kind of like my picture books. And so, without really knowing what I was talking about, when I was 6, I decided I was going to be a food writer, and continued to really devour these food magazines. It was, you know, Bon Appetits and New Yorkers. But I would read Bon Appetit really religiously and kind of built my life around being a food writer.
You took on this persona at like age 6.
Yeah, really. It's
Brooke
so
Jackson-Glidden,
funny.
food writer. Here's my business card.
Really, it was a very funny thing because I would write little reviews in my journals and
really? Oh my gosh,
no,
that's
I really wanted, it made it my whole thing, my whole personality. My dad was a great gardener, is a great gardener. My mom is a great home cook, and so when he would come home on the weekends, from his job in Chicago. We would eat these incredible dinners that were like things that my dad had grown and my mom had cooked. And so I really liked thinking about the table and how things get there.
Right. What did you guys make? Like, what would be something that you remember from your childhood?
Actually, a very silly thing is when I was in elementary school and we were asked what your favorite food is, my answer was game hens with cherry sauce. Because that was the thing my mom would make. She would smoke game hens and then she would roast cherries and then do like this really lovely cherry sauce over of these game hens. So that was like a classic of hers.
Yeah, it sounds delicious.
It's really good.
When I was in kindergarten, they asked the same thing. They said, "What's your favorite food?" And back then, I didn't really know, but in my family lore. Back when I was in Korea, our family had a farm and we raised rabbits, like rabbit for meat. And so my parents used to tell me that I loved the rabbit. And so you love rabbit. So in my mind, when they said go around the classroom, everyone saying hamburgers, pizzas, whatever, Twinkies, I was like, what's your favorite food, Judiann? Rabbit.
I love that. That's a great answer.
I didn't have a fancy sauce or anything.
Listen, rabbit though, that's great. I loved the game hen dish my mom made. My mom would make this really great cucumber soup.
Like a gazpacho kind of thing?
No, so I kind of figured out actually in a conversation with Bonnie Morales of Kachka that I think it's an Eastern European soup, but it's a chilled cucumber yogurt soup. Oh. And I love this dish.
Sounds refreshing.
It's really great this time of year. Super, super delicious. So I think that's another favorite from when I was growing up. My mom would make, whenever I was sick, she would make chicken tarragon soup, and I loved that. Do you have
a cultural background? Like, do you have a ethnicity?
Well,
a little bit of everything?
Technically, I'm mostly German. But I had to kind of dig into that culturally as an adult. My parents, I grew up kind of generically white in rural Oregon, or pseudo-rural Oregon. But I think that Eugene's culture, if you were to sort of like think about Eugene as a place, it's like hippies.
Right.
So
I think of very nuts and granola. And,
very crunchy in that sense. So like tofu pate was a thing that I would eat a lot as a kid, or a lot of just like a lot of like very like hippie
I was just thinking about tofu pate.
It's kind of like egg salad anyway.
That's just very good for you.
I think it's interesting. My mother cooked she cooked very French. And I think that's just because she was a mastering the art of French cooking
she was one. There's a whole I hear a lot of people's experience is with somebody in their lives mastering the art of French cooking. Julia Childs is just like my idol. I loved her, and I cooked quite a bit, and I went to culinary school. I studied French cooking technique, and so I myself has a great affection for French cooking and French technique.
I think there's a reason that it became such a a touchstone of the restaurant world, right? Having this foundation of French cooking technique.
Right.
And I think that I'm really grateful that my mom raised me kind of with that sensibility. And it was really interesting to, when I kind of went out in my own world and started to find what I liked and eat foods from a lot of different parts of the world, to come home and be like, okay, now let's work with fermented black beans or, something else to kind of, and when we cook together now, there's so much I get to show her, and that feels really special to feel like she taught me so much, and now I get to teach her some stuff, and she's lovingly receptive of that, as opposed to being like, why are you trying
I think it's great because when you eat out a lot, you get exposed to so many different ingredients or different techniques and flavor combinations. And if you already like to cook, it gives you more of a palette to increase your repertoire, so to speak,
No, I think again, it's sort of like a lens, right? And I think being able to figure out that you like things, and there's something so special about eating something when you go out to eat a lot and going, oh, what is that flavor?
Right.
And then sort of like pulling a cookbook or finding a recipe, going, it's pickled garlic.
Right.
You know, like kind of going like, oh, I figured it out.
Are you one of those people when you eat, like you can like close your eyes and like identify that spice or that flavor?
Sometimes. I think, so this was a thing my mom would do with me a lot as a kid, is that she would like put out spices unlabeled and like have me taste them and herbs or whatever. And go,
really?
what is that? Yeah, and I would say,
it's like today's afternoon fun. We're going to identify the spices.
I love this. And then my aunt gave her a scent box that you would use for like training yourself to taste wine.
Oh wow!
And so I loved this as a kid, and I would go like, "Ooh, okay, that's cloves." And it's like I'm not tasting wine.
It's
at that
very
age.
Montessori school, like when they, just like I'm having flashbacks to my children where they had to like do stuff like this.
Yeah, I think it's really fun. I mean, I'm not a parent. I'm still kind of like, but I think that if I were to do that, that's the thing that's most exciting to me is kind of being like, what do we think of this? Is this like crunchy or sweet or like
introducing and like talking about it in that way? Because so many people are so intimidated by food and cooking and spices, but it just comes down to like smelling and tasting and figuring out what you like. You know, there's no right or wrong.
100%. And I think that was something I didn't understand also just when I started to learn about wine, is, you know, thinking, well, there's good wine and bad wine. And you know, there is a cultural sort of thing that kind of emphasizes that. But being able to kind of understand, oh, I like wine that has a lot of acidity to it.
Right.
And there are a lot of people who don't. And that's actually fine. You know?
Yeah. No, it's like drink what you like. It's same thing with like coffee too. Some people like more, oh, this coffee, I don't like it. Or it's like, well, we'll figure out what it is that you like. Like, do you like it more acidic, fruity, like you more like a smooth?
Yeah.
Finding the language for sure. And then what was it like? I have to ask you, when you won the James Beard Award, let's talk about this now. What was that award for? I know, but like what was it for? And then what was that moment like? Because I, from the sidelines, was so excited for you because I could just imagine how proud for, you know, because you know, that's like the pinnacle of any career, but especially in the food world. Yeah,
you know, I really wasn't sure I'd ever win a James Beard Award in my life. So I won the Jonathan Gold Prize. It's the Jonathan Gold Award for Local Voices, I believe is the full title. It's specifically for reporters who work in like local beats. So, you know, within specific cities or communities that display a versatility of style. And behave as sort of service journalists for their communities or community-oriented journalists. So I had submitted, Eater really kind of encouraged me to submit a few pieces. I did a personal essay on Either Or as a coffee shop in my neighborhood as a third place. I wrote a piece about a now closed cart. I would love it. Mira's, please come back. Great food cart that was making iftar meals. And then I did a piece on Narcan kits and whether or not they should be stocked in particular restaurants and bars. And if servers should be Narcan trained. So it was a really broad sort of selection of pieces. I was nominated alongside my former co-worker, Kathy Chaplin, who's so incredible in LA, and Mike Jordan, who just won the same prize this year.
Oh, good for him!
Which I'm very happy for him. He's in Atlanta. All of them were Eater contributors at various points. I mean, obviously Kathy's on staff, but Mike was a consistent contributor to Atlanta. Right. Point is, I really didn't think I was going to win. Those are two really talented people.
Right. Good company.
I really didn't think I was going to win. I was there in supporting Kathy. I think, and you know, I think Mike's great. And I went to brunch with Karen Brooks, my now colleague, and she was like, "You should prepare a speech." And I'm like, "I'm not going to win, Karen." And she was like, I didn't think I was going to win the first time. You should prepare a speech. Yeah. And
good advice.
When I won, it really felt like the air just like was pushed out of my lungs. Like I think it was so surreal.
I listened to your speech and I remember feeling, I could imagine. I mean, I was for many years in New York, I was a food writer and I would cover the James Beard Award. I was press. And so I would be in the back right after they won the award, right when they got off stage, and we would interview them, and just the excitement and the kind of shock that they won. and you could just feel it. And I felt just watching your win, like I felt for you because I knew you, and I was so proud of you.
Yeah, thank you
moment.
So much. It was definitely like I just wept through that speech. I was so moved, and
let's face it, like writing is hard.
Right?
I mean, it's joyful, but it's, you know, a lot of it's done solo by yourself, you know.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, my old mentor of mine used to say that writing sucks because I'm gonna try to
for many reasons, but yes,
but
it's also so rewarding too.
Yes, but he would basically say you get crap from your editor, you get crap from sources, you get crap from readers, and it's over and over again. Then you do it again and again and again, but it beats working. Was sort of his perspective on it, and I think that I've dabbled with the idea of doing something else, but I'm a writer till I die. I think I'm an editor in my heart, and I can't see myself doing anything else.
Well, this city has certainly benefited from your writing and your editorial skills, and we are so excited for you. I can't wait to see your work at Portland Monthly. I know it's going to be great. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Happy to be here.